Hey there, okay, we're back. And this time we're going to be looking specifically at the NHS here. This is the National Healthcare System that the UK created. Really, the goal was to standardize care across the UK and for every person to be able to access healthcare, no matter what part of the UK they lived in, but to make sure that that standard access was there. And so the way they went about doing this was they didn't just go and all of a sudden build over 1,000 hospitals or anything like that. They basically just nationalized a lot of the hospitals that were already in the country and some municipal foundations, trying to make all that sort of kind of come together. And it wasn't perfect in the way that it happened, but they did get it done. And so this is going to be funded by contributions. And so in 2009, the average person in the UK contributed about $1,000 or $1,900, give or take a little bit. It's probably increased a bit since then, but that is about where we're at with the UK funding its healthcare system. And so this is, the point of interest for almost everyone. And so people get really concerned about the debates over this. And right now, obviously, with the virus and everything, the NHS is in the news a lot. But on any given week, in any given year, if you look at the Guardian newspaper or any other publication in the UK, they're going to be talking about the NHS. There's always something going on that people are debating on whether or not they should hire more doctors or work on refining the system in this particular area or anything like that. And so the debate goes back and forth over what extent it should be taken care of, but it's what extent it should be adjusted, but that's always back and forth and back and forth. But it is the system that everybody agrees upon here. So the way that they structured it was that you have the overall umbrella of the NHS, and then underneath that umbrella you have a bunch of trusts. That was the best way that they came up with to call it. And so you have acute trusts, and these are hospitals, treatment centers, specialists, and these fall in small groups within the hospital trust. And so you have about 2 to 8 sites, depending on their size and complexity, per trust within the acute trusts system. And so those will be 2 to 8 hospitals, probably maybe a couple of hospitals and a couple of specialists, those kind of arrangements. So having common management over these smaller areas that report to the larger umbrella. You also have ambulance trusts to make standardize ambulance service and availability. And so they're concerned with how long it takes for their people in an emergency to receive aid through an ambulance, and they try to standardize that across the country as best they can. Care trusts, those tend to lean more toward social services, and then mental health trusts. So obviously, taking care of mental health across the country, they fall under a separate category. But it is one of the largest employers in the world. Over 370,000 nurses are employed by the NHS. Over 150,000 doctors are employed by the NHS. And other qualified individuals of various disciplines, over 155,000 others. And so lots and lots and lots of people in the UK are employed by the NHS. And so that also kind of creates buy-in when people's employment is also tied to this, in addition to healthcare. So it's a major component of the country itself. And so I thought it'd be useful to be able to see. There's a channel on YouTube that's a useful follow if you are interested. It's called Healthcare Triage. And so they took a look at this was a couple of years back, but they took a look at the NHS system, just in general, how it works. And then in another video, they actually compared it to the U.S. system. This was closer to when the U.S. was debating Obamacare. And so it was, even more useful at that time, but it's still relevant to us today. And you get some good, comparisons between what it costs per person or the country as a whole to take care of its people, or as a component of GDP, which is or the budget, which we saw earlier in the pie charts. So you can check that out. That in itself is useful. So let me pause just a second and bring up these charts here. One moment. Okay, so this is the looking at just how expensive this organization is to run for the UK. And obviously this isn't that useful of a chart because over time expenses always go up. Care costs go up, but also just the number of people you're serving is going to go up because population grows. And so this in itself isn't that helpful, although you can see certain spikes in cost over time, and so those might be worth people exploring if they're trying to understand how this has grown and changed over time. But it is an expensive beast to run, as you saw, as a percentage of the annual budget. This is an interesting one. So in the UK, there are private providers. There's people who can afford it can seek health services from some private hospitals, some private specialists, and so rather than trying to bring every single service underneath the umbrella of the NHS, sometimes it's more cost effective for them to simply pay for services from those private providers for people that are seeking NHS care. And so over time, those percentages have gone up. And so this is a concern for the NHS and something that they debate at length, because you've seen this spike, especially as we got into the around 2015. You saw a significant jump here, a good percent or two more, and on up, and dips over time. But that's something that they do try to. It's a numbers game, and they have to do the math. Is it worth it to us to provide this particular care versus just paying for it when it's occasionally needed? Or should we bring that as part of the NHS? So that's always a debate. Excuse me. This is also one that is concerning, that is also endlessly debated. But this is percent, they call it A&E, but percent of patients dealt with inside of 4 hours. So, and it's broken down by parts of the UK. But if you look at it as a trend line, the trend line kind of goes down this way. And so what this is, let's just take England, for example. In 2010, 2011, well above 90% of patients were seen within 4 hours. In 2018, 2019, just below 90%. And it's the same in Wales and Scotland. A little less of a spread in Scotland. Northern Ireland saw a pretty dramatic drop. But if you can also think about it, the percentage of people not seen is growing and within 4 hours. And so this space above the bar is getting bigger in every case. And so that's a concern, is excuse me, I'm losing my voice, is the immediacy of care going down over time. And are we serving our people well enough with the funds that we are using? So this is something that's being debated currently in the UK, is wait times. That you have to hear that a lot in media surrounding the NHS. It's also being challenged by the fact that the population is getting older. And so this is 1966, 64 and under. is well up in the upper 80s. 2018, which we're closest to now. Sorry, I needed to take a second and get some water. 2018, which we're closest to now, is here in the low 80s at 64 and under. And, these are estimates by 2066. So 45-ish years from now, you're looking at just in the low 70s. And so but that also means that the cost, or the groups that are in the 65 to 74 range and then the 75 and older range are going to be growing over time because healthcare is getting better. And so those groups are going to be living longer lives. The challenge there is that compared to a 30-year-old, a 65-year-old tends to cost the system about 2.5 times as much. And a 90-year-old costs about 7 times as much. And so you need to take that into account when you're planning out how, the costs of the NHS. Over time, it's going to have to provide more and more elder care. Compared to your other European countries, it's about average. So this is obviously the UK being part of the EU system, which it's broken away from that now. We'll talk about that in coming weeks. But it's about average as far as cost, percent of gross GDP. So Sweden is spending more, Germany and France as well. And another challenge that is more a point of just debate and concern is that older people, so the older people who have the least tend to get care, but the most destitute from the state, but the provision of care for people, this would be like washing, dressing, the things that older people need help with, the day-to-day life functioning. They are the country has to rely on people paying for the help themselves, here in the purple, family and friends taking care of them, local councils providing help, or people just not getting help. It's just not a great setup, because this is what they call means tested. So means being like you have the means to pay for yourself. So if you don't have the means, then people will get help, if that makes sense. But this is an area of concern that the country is trying to look to as those, as these groups here get bigger at the top, more and more care is going to be needed. And so how are they going to provide that? That's an ongoing debate as well. So these are obviously not historical debates as to 45, but I wanted you to be able to see what's happening with the NHS right now. But this is a concern because the operating mandate back in 45 was the cradle to the grave. And so here you're getting closer to the latter end, and the care isn't being provided particularly well. And so that's a concern and a point of debate that people are dealing with. And so let me pause there, and we'll come back and wrap this little section here up.